Margaret Williams had an extraordinary final wish. As cancer consumed her body, all she wanted was to see Marvin Gaye perform live. When she bought her plane ticket to Amsterdam, the doctors were horrified. But that night, when the stage lights illuminated Margaret, what Marvin saw changed him completely. What happened in the next 2 minutes would become one of the most powerful moments in music history. Why did Marvin invite her on stage? If you want to hear this story in its entirety, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because Margaret Williams' story isn't just about a fan's final wish. It was also a pivotal moment in Marvin Gaye's own spiritual journey. In the magnificent hall of Amsterdam's Concertgebouw, 18,000 fans had surrendered themselves to the rhythm of sexual healing. Stage lights illuminated Marvin Gaye's sweat-glistened face as he stood there at 44, living through the most challenging period of his career. The European tour offered him both financial relief and an escape from the relentless pressure of American media. But what would unfold that night in Amsterdam would be far more than just another concert performance. Margaret Williams was a 67-year-old British nurse who had been battling pancreatic cancer for approximately 4 months. While doctors gave her 6 weeks at most, Margaret's only thought was seeing her son David's favorite artist perform live. David had been lost in the Vietnam War at 22, and the What's Going On album had been his most cherished music. For Margaret, this concert wasn't just a musical experience. It was her final connection to her son. During the concert, as Marvin scanned the audience from the edge of the stage, he noticed Margaret sitting in her wheelchair in the 3rd row. The tears in her eyes and the expression on her face caught Marvin's attention. At that moment, as he sang What's Going On, something shifted in his voice. It was as if he was feeling the music for the first time. But when he learned Margaret's story, he would realize that night was no mere coincidence. Margaret's journey to Amsterdam revealed her incredible determination. When the concert was announced, she was undergoing aggressive chemotherapy at Royal Marsden Hospital in London. Her oncologist had explicitly forbidden any travel, warning that her immune system was too compromised. Margaret had sold her late husband's vintage watch collection and used her entire pension savings to afford the Amsterdam trip and hire a private nurse, Sarah Henderson, for the journey. Marvin's decision to alter his setlist mid-concert was extremely rare for that period. Especially under the financial pressure of the European tour, every concert was meticulously planned, every minute calculated. But when he saw Margaret in her wheelchair, something deeper stirred within him. Concert promoter Hans van der Berg later recalled being initially frustrated when Marvin stopped the show, but quickly realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. The nurse she hired, Sarah Henderson, was initially reluctant to take the assignment. But when Margaret explained about David and showed her his final letter from Vietnam, Sarah couldn't refuse. That letter, worn from years of handling, contained David's words, "Mom, if I don't make it back, play this song and remember me dancing in our kitchen when I was 12. When they arrived at the Concertgebouw that evening, Margaret insisted on getting there early. She wanted to be close enough to see every expression on Marvin's face, to feel the full impact of the music that had meant so much to David. The venue staff, initially concerned about wheelchair accessibility, went out of their way to ensure Margaret had the best possible view. As Marvin approached the stage microphone, the energy in the room shifted palpably. "Tonight, something special is happening," he said, pointing toward Margaret. The crowd was initially puzzled, then fell into profound silence as they began to understand Margaret's situation. What followed would be etched forever in the memories of everyone present that night. Marvin's question, "Will you join me on stage?" sent an electric current through the hall. Margaret hesitated at first, then nodded her acceptance. As Sarah began pushing the wheelchair, 18,000 people rose to their feet. Meanwhile, Marvin waited at the stage edge, watching Margaret's slow approach. What was going through Marvin's mind in those moments would later be revealed as a complex mix of his own mortality fears and spiritual awakening. The wheelchair ramp to the stage had to be quickly assembled by the stage crew. This impromptu construction took nearly 3 minutes, during which the entire audience remained standing in respectful silence. As Margaret was wheeled up the ramp, several audience members later reported feeling an almost spiritual presence in the room. When Margaret reached the stage, Marvin knelt beside her wheelchair and whispered something in her ear. Years later, through Sarah's notes, it was revealed that Marvin had said, "David is here. I'm singing this for him." These words affected Margaret so profoundly that her tears of grief transformed into tears of joy. As Marvin stood and brought the microphone to his mouth, the silence in the hall was so complete you could hear a pin drop. "This song is for David," Marvin announced, and the opening notes of What's Going On began to flow. But this version was different from any that had come before. Every word was directed toward Margaret, as if he were speaking directly to David. Margaret sat in her wheelchair, eyes closed, swaying slightly to the music as if she were dancing with her son's spirit. The musicians on stage, who had played this song hundreds of times, found themselves deeply moved by this particular performance. The audience's response was unprecedented. Instead of the usual cheers and applause, there was a cathedral-like reverence. Many audience members later reported feeling the presence of their own lost loved ones during those magical minutes. As Marvin sang the lyrics, "Mother, Mother, there's too many of you crying," he looked directly into Margaret's eyes. She nodded slightly, as if acknowledging that yes, she had cried too many tears for her lost son. This visual exchange between performer and audience member created a connection that transcended the typical artist-fan relationship. While 18,000 people watched this scene unfold, many began to cry. In the concert recordings from that night, you hear only Marvin's voice and gentle sobbing sounds from the audience. This was an incredibly rare atmosphere for a live concert. Instead of the expected cheers and screams, there was a deep silence of respect and empathy. When Marvin finished the song, he took Margaret's hand and helped her stand from her wheelchair, embracing her. This hug lasted approximately 30 seconds, during which the hall remained completely silent. Then, as if a spell was being broken, thunderous applause began. But even this applause was different. Everyone was crying, everyone was under the spell of this magical moment. Margaret whispered in Marvin's ear, "Thank you for bringing David back to me." At this point, tears also appeared in Marvin's eyes. Considering the tense relationship he was having with his father at the time, along with his own struggles with depression, this moment served as a form of catharsis for Marvin as well. In helping Margaret, he was also healing his own spiritual wounds. But there was an even deeper story behind what happened that night. Margaret's son David Williams had been deployed to Vietnam in 1968. He was only 19 years old, and his passion for music continued even in the military camp. When his friends remembered David, they talked about how he constantly sang Marvin Gaye songs, especially playing "What's Going On" over and over again. In David's duffel bag, alongside letters from his mother, were album covers of Marvin Gaye records. David's unit was stationed near the Cambodian border during some of the war's most intense fighting. His squad leader remembered David as the morale booster of the unit. Whenever things got really bad, he recalled, David would start humming "What's Going On," and somehow it would calm everyone down. That song became our unofficial anthem. On March 15, 1970, David's unit was conducting a routine patrol when they encountered heavy enemy fire. David was serving as the unit's radio operator, continuing to relay coordinates for medical evacuation even after being seriously wounded, ultimately saving 3 of his fellow soldiers before succumbing to his injuries. When the news of David's death reached Margaret in 1970, her world collapsed. Among David's personal effects was his copy of the "What's Going On" album, with a note written on the cover, "Mom, if I don't make it back, play this song and remember me dancing in our kitchen when I was 12. This note made it impossible for Margaret to listen to that album for 13 years, until she learned about her cancer diagnosis. After the concert ended, Margaret was invited backstage. That night's backstage meetings created one of the most emotional moments in music history. Marvin asked Margaret detailed questions about David's story, and what she told him deeply affected him. Margaret showed Marvin David's final letter from Vietnam, and this letter moved Marvin so much that he made a copy and carried it with him. The backstage area that night was unlike any other concert aftermath, usually filled with celebration and industry networking. There was instead a reverent quiet. Margaret's nurse Sarah documented the encounter in detail, noting that Marvin spent over an hour with Margaret, asking about David's childhood, his dreams, his personality. That night, Marvin gave Margaret a special gift. He recorded an acoustic guitar version of "What's Going On" specifically for Margaret, with a personal message. "This is for David, wherever you are, and for Margaret, who keeps his love alive." Margaret treasured this cassette until her dying day, and it's still preserved by her family as an invaluable document. The connection between Marvin and Margaret didn't end with just that night. Marvin maintained regular phone conversations with Margaret during her remaining days. In these calls, Margaret shared stories about David's childhood and dreams, while Marvin shared his own struggles with family relationships. The friendship formed between these two people became healing for both. These phone conversations occurred approximately twice a week until Margaret's death. In her personal diary, Margaret wrote, "Marvin called today. He told me about his father and the pain he carries. I told him about David's laughter. We both cried and we both healed a little more." One particularly meaningful conversation occurred 3 weeks before Margaret's death. She told Marvin that since their meeting in Amsterdam, She had been able to listen to what's going on again without overwhelming sadness. Instead, she heard joy, David's joy, and the joy of a mother's love that transcends death. Marvin later said this conversation changed how he viewed his own music's impact. 6 weeks after the Amsterdam concert, Margaret Williams passed away peacefully at home. In her final days, she continuously listened to the cassette that Marvin had specially recorded for her. Nurse Sarah recounted that Margaret's final words were, "David is waiting for me, and Marvin's voice will reunite us." At Margaret's funeral, the wreath sent by Marvin bore the inscription, "For Margaret and David, music never dies." Carol, Margaret's daughter, later reflected on her mother's transformation in those final weeks. After Amsterdam, Mom was different. The crushing grief that had defined her for 13 years had lifted. She talked about David with joy instead of just sorrow. Marvin had given her back her ability to celebrate David's life. The most striking aspect of this story might be the contrast between the chaos in Marvin's own life at the time and the empathy he showed Margaret. In 1983, Marvin was struggling with financial problems, family conflicts, and personal depression. But when he encountered Margaret, he set aside his own pain to show her genuine compassion. After the Amsterdam concert, Marvin's friends noticed a significant change in him. Margaret and David's story had caused Marvin to re-examine his own relationship with his father. At a time when tension with Marvin Sr. was at its peak, Margaret's unconditional love for David had affected him deeply. Perhaps after seeing a mother's love, he began to view his own family dynamics differently. Marvin's diary entries from this period frequently referenced Margaret and David. "Margaret's love for David reminded me of the true meaning of my music," he wrote. These sentences showed that Marvin viewed his music not just as entertainment, but as a tool for healing and connecting people. The Amsterdam experience had helped Marvin redefine his identity as an artist. Some traces of Margaret and David's story can be found in Marvin's final album, Midnight Love, particularly in the demo recordings of Sexual Healing. You can hear Marvin humming "Healing is for Everyone." This clearly recalled the promise he had made to Margaret that music heals everyone, and this philosophy was reflected in his final work. For years, the complete recordings of the Amsterdam concert were considered lost. The concert had been professionally recorded, but the segment where Margaret was invited on stage wasn't released because it was considered too personal. In 1999, the Marvin Gaye estate found these recordings and, with Margaret's family's permission, partially released them. When you listen to these recordings, you understand that the night was not just a musical experience, but a spiritual one. Marvin's voice's sincerity, Margaret's gentle weeping, the hall's silence, and that special version of What's Going On affect listeners regardless of recording quality. Music historians classify this recording as the most authentic Marvin Gaye performance. Margaret's family indicates that they only listen to these recordings on special occasions: David's birthdays, Margaret's death anniversary, and family gatherings. Margaret's granddaughter Emily says, "This recording is our family history. My grandmother and Uncle David's story lives here." Emily, who never met David, says she has come to know him through this recording. Approximately 5 months after the Amsterdam concert, Marvin Gaye was killed by his father in 1984. This tragic end makes his experience with Margaret even more meaningful. After witnessing Margaret's love for David, Marvin was known to have been trying to heal his relationship with his own family. Unfortunately, this effort wasn't enough. After Marvin's death, Margaret's family sent a condolence message to Marvin's family through Sarah Henderson. This message expressed Margaret's gratitude to Marvin, and how significant that night had been for both families. Marvin's mother, Alberta Gaye, reportedly cried when she received this message, saying, "My son had a good heart. Margaret understood him." Today, Margaret Williams' story is remembered among Marvin Gaye fans as a legendary moment. At the annual Marvin Gaye tribute concerts held at Amsterdam's Concertgebouw, a special moment is reserved for Margaret and David. When What's Going On is played at these events, those who experienced that night still say they get goosebumps. David Williams' Marvin Gaye album covers that he used in Vietnam are now displayed at the African American History Museum in Washington, D.C. Margaret's story is also told as part of this exhibit. After learning this story, visitors often become emotional and gain a deeper understanding of music's impact on people. Margaret's night in Amsterdam wasn't just about a fan's final wish being fulfilled. It was proof of music's healing power, the boundaries of empathy, and how powerful human connections can be. When Marvin Gaye invited Margaret on stage that night, he wasn't just making her happy, he was also creating a moment that would become part of music history. And perhaps most importantly, Margaret's story reminds us that music is not just entertainment, but also a tool for healing, connection, and remembrance. David Williams may have lost his life in Vietnam, but through his mother Margaret and Marvin Gaye, he continued to live on through music. That night in Amsterdam, three spirits took the stage: Margaret, Marvin, and David, and the magic of that night continues decades later. Margaret Williams' story from Amsterdam is an important part of not only Marvin Gaye's musical legacy but also his human legacy. This story shows us that true artists don't just sing songs on stage. They touch lives, heal pain, and spread love. When Marvin invited Margaret on stage that night, he had created music's purest form, its most powerful moment. And the story doesn't end here. Every time you listen to What's Going On, every time a Marvin Gaye song plays, Margaret and David's spirits continue to live in that music. Because music, like love, never dies. It just continues to live in other hearts, in other souls. This story is not just a beautiful memory from the past, but also a lesson for today. There are Margarets around us, people wanting to fulfill their final wishes, and we all have the power, however small, to touch someone else's life. Marvin Gaye didn't just give a concert that night. He showed the most beautiful face of humanity,